Hey, all, this is Kasakma Keperu here with another broadcast. And I want to talk to you today about Ausar, Het-Heru, and the Great Battle. It was Einstein, I believe, who said that you can't solve a problem using the same mindset that created it. And then Nikola Tesla said, basically, we live in a realm, and not so much a universe or a planet, but a realm. So I want you to keep those two ideas in mind as I go through all of this. You'll find that a lot of people in the conspiracy theory arena keep talking about this new world order or one world government that's coming, and it's going to follow along the lines of George Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And one thing I keep emphasizing is that we've already entered that period. We are here in a new world order. The masses of us on this planet are brainwashed. We're walking around not thinking correctly. We're not seeing correctly. And but we have this notion that this police state, this militarized state, is going to come along and put us under one rule. And the fact of the matter is that the global elite, those that are ruling this planet, are more clever than that, and they're more sinister than that, because they're more interested in more mind control techniques and getting you to a place and a mindset of where you will fight for your own enslavement. And that's where we're going right now. So if you go back and look at what we call as ancient culture, or what Western society calls primitive culture, you'll understand that our ancestors had a way of life that they wanted us to live, and that timeline was interrupted as we moved from things like the moon cult to the solar cult. That's a grand, I use it as a metaphor, but there were these different cults in ancient times, and these cults weren't just worshiping the moon or the sun, but they had a pattern of thinking and a way of looking at the world that made sense, and it was a holistic viewpoint. Right now, the way we are looking at things, we're not seeing things correctly, and it's creating more problems, more devastation on the planet. And we think that what we see around us is what is what should be, what is civilized society, and it's not. And that's a big problem, because the problem is that you have these spiritual gurus out there who are talking about how to change the world, and they may be sincere at heart, but they're still operating from the same thought process that created the problem in the first place. So they can't solve the problem, is what I'm trying to communicate here. And if you go back and look at the story of the ancient Egyptian story, a Kemetic story of Ausar and the Set, that tells us a lot, because in that story, Osiris, who was known as the Great Uniter, ruled Kemet, or Egypt. And he was dethroned and taken off the throne by his evil brother Set. Set is a symbol of left brain emotional thinking. And just to sum it up, is more complicated than that, but I'm just summing it up. And basically, his body was cut up and then dispersed across the planet. And his wife, Auset, or Isis, went out on a journey to collect the pieces, to reassemble them, and to bring him back to the throne. But it was really his son, Horus, who battled Set and won. But when he first battled Set, it was always, well, he battled Set a couple of times, depending upon which version of the story you read. He battled Set a couple of times, but it always ended in a type of a stalemate, all right, until he was able to see Tahuti, Thoth, and Thoth gave him wisdom and insight, using the third eye, his third eye, to be able to beat Set. And that was the only way he could defeat his uncle Set, and bring his father back to the throne. So that is a grand metaphor for what's going on today. And what I mean by that is that Western culture, European culture, is a very left-brain culture, right? And African culture, and most primitive cultures, as we term them today, were holistic cultures. They use both the left and the right brain, integrated brain thinking. And well, why is that important? Because when you understand that, when you start to think holistically, you don't start to look at things as polarized, meaning you don't see good and evil, good and evil, right and wrong. You don't start to see things in that way. And if you, as a child growing up, you'll see that our stories are laden with those type of ideologies about, the good guy defeating the bad guy, and so on and so forth. But if you look at the story of Ausar Set, one of the interesting points about that was that it tried to let you know that even though Set had committed some atrocities, and he was evil, he was a mass murderer, he was this and that, that we always have to understand that if not for Set, we would not flex our spiritual muscles, because it was through the challenge of this evil that we were able to grow spiritually and come into the realization of who we are, which is Ausar. Ausar symbolizes the great uniter. He wears the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. This is, again, a grand metaphor for the right and left brains integrated, working together. Now, what we have today is we have this fallacy of polarized thinking is the best way of thinking, which means left brain thinking, which tends to, all it wants to do is label, define, separate, categorize. Now, your reality in this realm is based upon the synaptic connections you make in the brain, meaning that reality does not exist externally, it exists within, because the connections that you make project a holographic experience for you to interact with. And that's why Neter, God, is placed its consciousness within you in this fourth dimensional realm, is to get an experience so it can experience itself. Consciousness is experiencing itself, is interacting with itself in this holographic game, we can call a movie and all that. And the reality that you see around you greatly depends on what connections or what neurons are firing off in the brain. So in other words, if you are polarized in left brain thinking, you're seeing things in a very segregated way. If you're polarized in right brain thinking, then you're seeing things in a very holistic way. In fact, if you study the Indian Chachalama, it's a paradigm of thinking that takes into consideration many modes of thinking and has you focus on all of those modes of thinking as one integrated pattern of thinking. So in other words, the Tetralama will say you're going to take one idea and then another opposing idea, hold both those ideas, and then you see what comes out of that you don't see them as opposite of one another, but you see them in a way as kind of complementary. And it also does this. It takes a positive idea and another positive idea, both are truths, and you're holding them, and you're not seeing that they're contradicting each other, which is in Egyptian mythology, you have Ma'ati, M-A-A-T-I, which is the two truths. And so you can say that is the absolute and the relative truth, you know what I mean? And in life, we have this, we have the explicit and the implicit, you know what I mean? So the Tetralama encompasses many modes of thinking at once, which is why we see the problems that are going on in our world today, because we are so caught up in what we call the Hegelian dialectic, which means that everything has to be positive and negative, right and wrong. And this has caused so much problems in the world via this left brain pattern of thinking, which wants to label and create factions. It wants to say, you and I cannot unite because we have diametrically opposing viewpoints. Whereas the right brain wants to seek and say, how are we alike? So let me break some of this down. There's this look at it this way. There's three modes of thinking. There is analysis, which separates things through abstractions. There is synthesis, which ties unrelated external things together, all right? Through abstractions. And then there's congregative thinking, which combines things based on external components. All right. Now, the problems that are caused in the world is that we're separating things and we don't see how they're alike. We need to get back to synthesis thinking, which is Ma'at thinking, which is seeing everything as an integral part of the whole, and that everything has its place. This goes back to the cosmological framework that we have to adapt to understand. So synthesis thinking says, you know what? Even though externally you may be white and I may be black, internally on an abstract level, we both are consciousness, one consciousness. So we are essentially one. There's no separation. You know what I mean? So we have to keep that in mind, because if we continue this course of looking at things externally and based on a concrete perspective, then we're getting into a lot of issues and trouble, hence is where we are with the world today. And let me give you an example of that. So again, going back to the conspiracy theorists, they cannot imagine that there is more of a battle for the spirit and the mind than there is for creating a militarized police state. In other words, their view of how things will pan out in the future has to always do with some external force being imposed upon you. And they don't understand that through occult powers, the ruling elite know how to control what you think, how you act. And that's a little too far-fetched because they're more thinking concrete, which is what the left brain does. It thinks more in terms of the sensory input, you know, what you can see, hear, feel, taste, and all of that stuff, you know. So, and this is where we have a lot of a Western society has based itself upon. And it has a lot of problems with synthesis thinking. But ancient cultures thought in this way, which is why they always saw how things tied into one another. You know, they saw things in a very holistic way, that the spirit was tied in to the plants, the earth, the water, and things of that nature. And they used analogies and metaphors in their stories. And the inability of modern historians and Egyptologists to understand that, you know, Egypt had a high science, but they can understand that because they're looking for a subject matter that's separated, labeled, and defined as science, when that's not how ancient cultures work. They work through an integrated abstract process, you know. So anyway, going back to the story of Ausar and Auset, so what we have to realize is that the battle today is to bring back that integrated way of thinking, to bring back Ausar. Another thing that we have to keep in mind is that when I alluded to earlier, when I said that the world that you are creating, the holographic experience that you're creating in front of you, depends on how you're viewing the world. So there are different parts of the brain. There's the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the left brain, the right brain, the mammalian brain, the reptilian brain. You know, you have all these these aspects of the brain. And what the ruling elite does is not only is it polarizing us in the left brain, but it's creating a world that fires off neurons in the mammalian brain, because what we want to do is we want to make you overly emotional, that you act on your emotions and make you more left brain than anything, so that you just react, and that you're spontaneous and you're not thinking straight, you know. Now, the important key to remember in the story of Ausar Set is that Heru, or Horus, could not defeat Set until he went and saw Tahuti. What does Tahuti symbolize? Tahuti symbolizes higher thinking. It symbolizes your third eye. So in this society, we totally discard anything that has to do with the subconscious mind, with anything that has to do with the higher realms of consciousness. You know, so tapping into the third eye is not something that's even conceivable. And how do we intuit wisdom and knowledge? Well, we have to still the thought process. We have to go into that process of no thinking, because when we do that, consciousness withdraws and goes into oneness. It goes back to all that there is, which is the one, and it can access the Akashic records and bring down wisdom and knowledge to help us in our lives. But it's too esoteric for left brain thinkers. It's too much. But this is an aspect of what we have. You know, we have a pineal gland. This is how, and the pineal gland, the chief component of that is melanin. This is how we can tie in to a higher aspect of ourselves. If we are only looking at ourselves in terms of the vehicle, the physical body, which the Egyptians called the Geb, if we're only looking at ourselves as that, then we are pretty sad creatures. But we have to understand that we have spiritual powers, that we have phenomenal powers that we haven't tapped into. But we, first and foremost, we can't conceive of that because we're living in a matrix which is brainwashed and program us to only think in a certain way, and that none of that can exist. None of that is possible. We're just higher evolved apes. That's all that we are. We're not seeing that we're God man, God woman. And this is what we have to start turning and looking into and saying, wait a minute, if we're a consciousness and we're all connected, that means we are God. Then we have access to God's wisdom, access to God's knowledge, that we can that travel through space and time. We're multidimensional creatures. We can travel. There's 1 in 11 dimensions. We can travel through these dimensions, and we're traveling through parallel universes all the time. So we know that subatomic particles are like can be in two places at once, can be in many places at once, and we're composed of those subatomic particles. So when we hear, we're also in the same space and time as another universe, another parallel universe. So these are the things that we have to keep in mind, and we have access to those other lives that we're living at this particular moment in time. All right. But this is something that it's very difficult for us to accept, because we have institutions that are set up that are programming institutions to keep us away from this knowledge, which we call churches. And these churches are there, or these mosques are there to instill left brain thinking to you, meaning left brain only operates. It thinks that the way to transform a person is through verbal discourse. So if I am saying some prophetic words to you or speaking in tongues, that will emotionally excite you to change. When we know that the way to true change is to tap into the subconscious mind and reprogram the subconscious mind, which is what the ruling elite is doing, is they know how to program us. They know how to tap into and hack our minds to get us to think in a certain way, which is why the planet is dominated with this left brain limited linear thinking. So when we look at the story of Osiris Set, and we know that Heru, his only way to defeat Set was to go to Tahuti, higher knowledge and wisdom, which Tahuti also symbolizes the oracles. Going to Tahuti for wisdom, he was able then to defeat Set and put Ausar back on the throne. And as I said before, Ausar symbolizes left and right brain, but more importantly, Ausar is a great uniter, and he's symbolized by a mummy. And what does that mean? That means that he's beyond the influence of emotions. That means that he's not swayed by emotions. You know what I mean? He's a great judge. You can't use, as the preacher does, good sermons and good words to move him. It won't work. He's beyond that, because he has the power of Tahuti with him. He has the spiritual power of Sekert. You know, he sits on truth, which is Ma'at. You know, and he has by his side Auset, or Isis. Isis symbolizes trance induction. In order for you to create the world that you see around you, you have to go into a trance-like state, which is what we call in modern hypnosis or hypnotherapy is a reality tunnel, because that's what the ruling elite does. They have created and words and definitions that are emotionally charged that within you creates a hypnotic or a trance-like state, and then you create the world around you through a reality tunnel. So, and let me say this, we all live in a different reality. You're not experiencing the same reality I am, and your reality is different from your mother's, your sisters, your brothers, your boyfriend, your girlfriends. They all live in different realities, and they all live in different space-time continuums. I may, as I'm making this broadcast, I may be in the past and you may be in the future. We know that matter warps space and time. Einstein said this. So you and I cannot exist in this physical fourth dimensional plane in the same space-time. We can't. All right? So it's only when we come into contact with each other that we bridge that gap, and we work in the same space-time. So think about that paradox. All right? Anyway, so these are very hard concepts for people to get, but these are factual concepts. They did studies where one individual standing on the street holding a watch, and another individual in an airplane holding a watch, same time starting out, but they found out that the individuals playing the watch was off by microseconds. They didn't have the same time, because we know that that distance created what we call is a change in time. What's it called? Time. I think it's called. It'll come to me. I have to think about it. But the difference is a difference in time that they both experience. They don't experience the same time. All right. So as we move on and start to understand this, the only way that we can really free ourselves is not going to be through scripture, through words. It's going to be more or less through self-development and spiritual elevation. Because without that, there's no other way to save us. Because the fact of the matter is that the more that we try to get ourselves out of the situation without changing the way that we are seeing life, the way we're perceiving it, the more we're going to just create the same problem over and over again. You're going to remove the leaders that are currently in place, but because you still have the same mindset, that left brain mindset, you're going to put new leaders in place who are going to do the exact same thing. If you look at that series, The Hunger Games, the movies, and that really exemplifies it, because they were successful in getting the guy out of office, but the girl they put in office was doing the exact same thing that he was going to do. Spoiler alert, she was going to continue the Hunger Games. So that gives you a really good insight as to, although, yes, you may temporarily change things, but if you don't change your mindset, you're only going to just reboot everything all over again and have to go through it again, which is symbolized again in the story of Ausar and Auset. When Heru kept battling Set, all he could get was a stalemate in that. All right. So the thing I was trying to talk about before was time dilation. Okay, that's the term for it, where two people are not experiencing the same, or two events are not experiencing the same timeline. All right. So think about everything I've given to you. Really try to understand that we have to start instilling higher knowledge, integrated ways of thinking, as opposed to just relying on the Western left brain mindset to get us out of the situation that we're in, because all it's going to do is create more and more problems. And, it's going to dig a hole for ourselves. And there's this term that says, if you're a hammer, everything you see is a nail. So that's how left brain thinking is. It can't stop what it's doing. As long as you're polarized in that, you're going to forever see black, white, good, bad, day, night. That's all you're going to see. But you're never going to see that everything is composed. Everything is one. And everything has a place within this oneness and functions to support the whole. When they've done experiments with drugs like DMT, or when they've done operations on individuals who were awake and operating on their brain, they would stimulate certain centers of the brain and realize that person would experience different aspects of life depending on which part of the brain was stimulated. And DMT, when individuals would take that, they would start to have this calm sense of oneness that they've never experienced in their life, and it would radically change the way they saw life, because they were so trapped in left brain thinking that when the DMT kicked in the right side of the brain and made an integrated way of seeing things, it not only changed the way they thought, but they started to see a different reality in the world. Because when your thinking changes through synchronicity, you create a different holographic experience to interact with, and the one that we're interacting with is not meant to be here. Remember, I said before, the timeline was disturbed. So we went from right brain integrated thinking to left brain thinking. That was what I was saying before about the moon cult, and then switching to the solar cult, or we could say the stellar cult to the solar cult. Solar is just a metaphor for going from, externalized thinking, and the moon is internalized. All right. So I hope this is been beneficial to you, and that you'll take this information in. If you like this broadcast, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. And this is Kasankma Keperu, and that's all for now. Thank you.